Hi, Stacey Murphy here with a quick video on getting that timing just right in your garden so you can pack in the most amount of plants. Now, I've said it before, timing is everything. So what do you do when you don't get the timing right? Something doesn't grow in on time, something doesn't grow as well as you hoped. What do you do to fix it?
All right, you've done your homework for the season. You've created a roadmap for the entire growing season. You know what you're going to plant, you know when you're going to plant it, you know where it's going to go in your planting beds. Maybe you have successions planned where you're going to grow some broccoli when it's cold in the spring, and then as it warms up, that broccoli is going to mature and be harvested. You're going to plant some summer squash, and then maybe after the summer squash comes in and it gets too cold, you're going to plant some bok choy or something like that. And so timing is everything to get the most out of all of those crops and make sure that they fit into your growing season, right? And so that's what we know. Timing is everything. Now, the trick is that even when we have these really greatly laid plans, we know exactly how many days everything should take. Mother Nature sometimes has a different plan in mind. So why do things sometimes go wrong in timing? So sometimes your best laid plans will be affected by hot spells, cold spells, longer days and shorter days depending on how many sunlight hours are available, if it's near an equinox or if it's near a solstice, whether your area is getting more or less rain than typical. These are all things that are going to affect how quickly your plants come into maturity. And so just one thing to be conscious of, and then we'll talk about a couple of fixes for different timing scenarios. One thing to notice is that as your sunlight hours uh, decrease, those plants are going to slow down, and this makes sense because they want to photosynthesize. Usually those shorter days also are accompanied by colder nights as well, so that can slow down growth as well. So a good rule of thumb is if you live in an area with a winter, then you want to add 14 days to your maturity dates as you approach that shortest date of the year, and that will help you make sure that your crops come in before you get any cold snaps. So that's one thing to be aware of. And so what I wanted to do in this video was share several things that can go wrong with timing and then fixes to have ready in waiting in order to overcome those challenges. All right, so the first fix is that you want to be ready for any transplants that fail. So oftentimes when we put in our plants in the spring, we're putting in transplants. We're excited. These are teenage plants that are ready to go, and we want them to just take off and have our food ready to rock and roll. Now this bed is my winter garden bed, and I transplanted a whole lot of things into this bed, and I thought it was going to be warm enough for dill, but apparently we got some cold snaps. It's just a little bit too cold here to grow that dill in the winter, so that's where those arrows are. So I want to be ready to put something else in. I don't want to be sitting around coddling plants that are not 100% healthy. Now, this might happen for other reasons. It might just be a plant that's stunted for some reason. But in this case, I'm just going to pull those two dill plants out and I'm going to put in something else. Now, what's great idea for putting in another plant if you have a gap in your plan, go to the store. There's always herbs that are available. That's a really great option, just to put an herb plant in to those gaps, and that's going to also help you increase your beneficial insect population. So in this case, these two dill plants, I later replaced them with parsley. Now notice, I have a stunted seedling here. If I thought that this plant wasn't going to get larger, notice the plants all around it were planted at the same time, and this plant remains small. So that's a sign that there might be something going on with this particular plant, and maybe I want to put in something else. So I made a decision in this case to leave the plant in the ground, and what I did is I thinned it out. There's actually maybe three seedlings there, and that's why they weren't growing so fast, is that they were all on top of each other. But if you have something that's stunted and everything else around it is growing well, you want to pull that out and put something else in that's going to do well. Why take up precious space with something that's not 100% healthy? All right, so fix number 2, you want to be ready for skips. If you're planting seeds in rows, sometimes when you're planting those seeds, anything can happen. Germination rates can be low. Maybe you didn't plant enough seeds. So you want to be ready. Now, this is my planting bed this winter where I planted in radish, turnip, carrots, and beets all in rows. And I planted quite a few seeds. And so there's not a lot of skips in my line because I really overplanted. So what you want to think about is if you do have skips in the row and you want to think about how much would it affect your timing just to plant more seeds. And something to note is, you see the radish are the largest seedlings here already. At 14 days, they're pretty big. Turnips are behind that. They're in the next biggest. Carrots are pretty tiny. They just barely sprouted. And the beets are just a little bit bigger than the carrots. So what you'll notice is that when you're planting a row of seeds, within 3 days whether or not you need to plant more radishes because they're already sprouting. But it takes 14 days to really know if you have enough carrots in your line. And so that might really throw off your long-term plan if you want to try to fill in those gaps. But let's say with your radishes, just 3 days, I would go back in and plant more radishes if I had skips. So what might I do if I had skips in my line with my radishes or my beets that took longer to grow in? It took 14 days to really know how many skips I had in the line. Well, I'm basically going to take a look at how big that skip is. And in this case, my beets have a couple of inches there where there's a skip. Now, beets, I like to plant them, 3 to 4 inches apart. And so those skips in the row might not be that big of a deal because they are about 3 to 4 inches. But if they were much bigger, if they were like 6 inches, say, I might pop a plant in there. I might pop some spinach in if I had some spinach or lettuce or some kind of transplant that I could pop in. I might pop it in there just to take up that space. I might wait until those plants are a little bit bigger just to allow the beets time to get ahead of that lettuce. But if I have the space, I might pop something else in. And let's say I had maybe half the row, let's say, had grown in really thinly and the other half looked really good. I might sacrifice that half row and say, you know what, it's not worth it to wait around for like 5 or 6 carrots when I could plant a whole row of something else. And so I might sacrifice and decide that I'm going to plant something else if there's a lot of skips in a certain area. So those are all decisions that you should make early on. Make them fast because timing is everything, right? And so just do the math in your head and say, is it worth it to grow this many carrots in this space, or should I pop in something else because, there's just too many skips? All right, so you want to be ready when crops aren't done on time. So sometimes this happens where you're waiting and plants are growing into maturity and they just aren't growing in as fast as you think. Maybe you had a cold snap, maybe you had a dry spell, whatever the case may be. And so you're waiting to put in another crop right behind it, and you know that your season might be ending and you want to get that crop in the ground so that it comes to full maturity before the end of the season, and you're getting anxious and how am I going to get this other crop in? So one of the things that you can do is undercrop or under transplant. And what I mean by that is literally plant under the crop that is taking too long to come in. And so in this case, I've got you can kind of tell it is a cherry tomato plant that's very tall. All the bottom leaves are cut off of it, and it's still going strong. In this case, our fall lasted longer than normal, and I wanted to keep growing those tomatoes as long as possible. It wasn't getting too cold for those tomatoes yet, but it was really time to put the next crops in order to beat the end of the season. And so what I did is I just started putting my seeds underneath those taller plants, and I cut out as many branches as I could so that the lower crop could receive sunlight. So you can do this with lots of different things. If it's time to cover crop and your crops are still producing, you can undercrop your seeds and let them grow in. I've done this with broccoli. Sometimes broccoli takes a little bit longer than you think, and you're waiting and you're waiting. So what I'll do sometimes is I will transplant, or I'll seed underneath it. I've seeded a whole bed of arugula underneath my broccoli, and then basically when the broccoli comes in, I just snip the stem and I leave all the roots intact so that I don't disturb all the arugula that I just planted, and then my arugula comes in just fine. So you can try to undercrop and get a head start for that next crop that wants to come in. This is another way to speed up your process, your timing of the season. If you know what you're doing, you can kind of use this technique to get crops moving quickly through your space as well. And then you also want to be ready for crops that come in too early. So broccoli is one of the crops that is, you have to get the timing just right. And sometimes it comes in too early. You get a hot spell and the plant wants to bolt and it starts to flower. These yellow flowers mean that broccoli is starting to bolt, right? And so you want to be observing your plants at least a week before the maturity date and make sure you know what stage they're in, make sure you know if they're coming in early, and you want to catch it in time and cut it and eat it. Now, broccoli is one of those plants that if it does come in early, you might let it flower. It might be very delicious. Now, I've eaten this broccoli before. All the flower, all of this is edible. The stalk is edible, the flowers are edible. So you might just let the plant continue to produce, and those 10 days that you were waiting to put the next crop in, let's say your transplants aren't ready to go in the ground yet, you can just keep letting this broccoli grow and keep harvesting different parts of it off as you wait for that next crop to be ready to be transplanted. So that's one thing you can do. And another thing you can do is if you have 10 days before your next scheduled planting, let's say you're waiting for your transplants to get large enough to put them in the ground, you can grow a round of shoots, and whatever seeds you have around might be the seeds you need. It could be sunflowers, it could be pea shoots. You could even put in the ground things like radishes and turnips and let them grow little shoots and then trim them after 10 days and have a little shoot salad. And these are grown indoors. These images here are things that are grown indoors, but there's no reason that you can't do this outdoors as well. All right, and then the last fix is to be ready for the next time this might happen. And so let's say your particular area, your region, you might have nuances to your climate that forces broccoli to do a certain thing, that forces summer squash to do a certain thing. And so how are you going to record that information to be ready for this when it happens again next year? So in some way, shape, or form, whether it's on your harvest log or on your crop plan, mark what things came in early, what things came in late, and how you might make adjustments for the next year. And all of this is reliant on you having a crop plan and having those timings already set in place and knowing what you want to plant when. This is fixing those timing errors. So if you want to learn more about how to create that crop plan in the first place, check out bkfarmyards.com/crop plan.